Hi, my name is Terry Hill. Welcome to Cheap Tricks and Special Effects. Today we'd like to take the time to help you maybe learn some shortcuts and find some easier ways to do things, because it's always better to work smart rather than work hard. So we're going to start out with one of the problems a lot of people have had, and I've had myself, and I learned this from another airbrush artist, and a lot of these tricks I'm going to show you I've learned kind of along the way from other people. If you ever have trouble painting a hat, and this is really a common problem, because if you want to paint a hat, if you got a bottle hanging below your airbrush, it's hard to get in close to do any fine detail work because you keep bumping the bill. So here's a cheap way to fold the hat so that it'll be flat. Now you start out by impressing the center of the hat. Then you kind of accordion it together, okay, like this. Now here's the big secret. You flip this band up. Once you do that, okay, it'll lay flat just like this. Now I'll show you how it mounts to paint. You turn over here and you just have a couple of clothespins and a regular t-shirt board, which you're going to have laying around anyway. You just force the pins down on there. Now you can literally get right in here as close as you want to get and paint all these little details. If you're doing a beach scene, for example, the fold in the edge of the hat right here will literally create a little shaded area, so it'll make a sand dune on either side for you. So that's my best tip I can give you on a hat. I'm going to show you a way that even if you don't have any mastery of the freehand control of the airbrush, you can still make some money using the airbrush. This is called the twist design. Now what we're going to do is we're going to try to twist this thing up and then paint on it. It's kind of like a tie-dye, but it's different. But the trick here is knowing whether it's going to be the front of the shirt or the back of the shirt when you twist it all up. You can't just wad it up kind of indiscriminately. You got to have a system to doing it. So the way we do this is we start at the juncture of the sleeve and the shoulder of the shirt. Just pick either side. Now you take this sleeve and fold it to the back of the shirt. In this case, we're only going to paint on the front of the shirt. So fold that sleeve out of the way. Now you're going to hold that point, pinch it with your fingers. Now we have this collar to deal with. It's in the way. So we basically have to fold it around behind. And I'll move to the camera so you can see me fold this collar around and kind of tuck it in. I'm rolling it in and matching the collar with the sleeve juncture. Now if you'll notice, the whole length of the shirt now it's only the front side of the shirt, or the back if you had chosen to go with the back. Now, what you want to look for is telltale things like, see how this collar is sticking out just a little bit? That would be an adjustment I would need to make right now. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to tuck this collar just a little farther in and make sure that it's scrunched all the way in. Now when I get to this point, I'm going to take this little point that we started with, I'm going to hand it to an assistant. Now here's the fun part about it. When you have a customer come in your store, you can literally ask them to help you make their shirt. So you're going to hand this corner to an assistant. At this point, Pat Reynolds is going to come on board and help us here. And he's going to hold this corner tightly. Now while he's got it, I'm going to twist the shirt. You can twist it as tight as you'd like. You get different effects depending on how tight you twist it. But just make sure that you do get it relatively secure, because otherwise it's going to look fuzzy if you don't get a little bit of tension on there. Now every now and then you'll have to have a little tug-of-war with your assistant. It's a good way to do it, to make sure that you get these wrinkles in there tight. Okay, now I'm going to turn now, and I'm literally going to paint along the edge of this shirt. Now I'm just going to go through a rainbow spectrum of color, and as I go I'm going to twist it, and Pat and I are going to twist together. It's important that you do keep some tension on this shirt to make sure that the pattern comes out crisp. Now when you're choosing your colors to do this, you might want to take maybe an NFL team and do like NFL colors, for example, and maybe write the name of that team on there for kind of a generic souvenir to hand to somebody. Or you might want to just, maybe it's around Christmas, you want to do one in red and green. But whatever you do, try to make sure that the colors are compatible and will blend with one another, the ones that touch each other. In other words, you wouldn't want to take, say, purple and blend straight into yellow, because if you do that, you get kind of a muddy color in between. So what you might want to do is make one of the colors an opaque color. Let's say opaque purple and a transparent yellow. Now, something like this, you're probably going to be able to get in the neighborhood of $15 just for the twisting of this thing, plus whatever you price the garment at. You know, you might be working on, say, a leotard used in aerobic workout, which would be a little more valuable than a t-shirt. Or you might do a whole set. You might do a shirt and some sweatpants together. And, you know, you're going to be able to bump the price up that way also. So it's all up to you for what kind of garment you want to put it on. And you're going to price it according to your market as well. In some areas, like at a flea market, you might want to just do up a bunch of these things ahead of time. And let's twist that a little tighter, Pat. You might want to do a bunch of these ahead of time and then have a rack full of these, and people can just come through and pick them out. The beauty of that is you're going to have the only accessories that go with this outfit. Let's say you take the chance and you make it look kind of boutique-y, say with like danskins or one of those nice type dance garments. And so you'll make earrings that match it, maybe barrettes that match it. There are a few companies now making blank barrettes that you can actually airbrush on. So you can kind of control the whole outfit that way. Now at this point, it just looks like one big painted rag. But when we unwind it, the magic kind of comes out. Also, be careful when unwinding it because this paint's relatively wet. Now, what an interesting effect that you can get just from something that simple. I mean, you could literally train people, if they came into your store, like employees, with absolutely no talent on the airbrush, you can train them to produce these things for you. And again, you know, the color is all up to you. Now, I'm going to do some more stuff with this. I'm going to hand this off to Pat, and he's going to heat press this under an iron to set the paint so that I'm not working with a wet area. And we heat press the paint at about 350 to 375 degrees for about 30 seconds. So here you go, Pat, and he'll be back in a moment, and I'll work some more on this shirt. Thank you. Now, next thing along is I want to talk about little items that are helpful in troubleshooting with your airbrush. One of the biggest culprits to airbrushing is tip dry. We're using paint that dries so fast, you know, for production purposes, that it literally dries right on the needle. And there's not been a company yet that's been able to produce a paint that would dry well on the shirt and on license plates, but didn't have the tip dry problem. So we got to come up with a way to solve this, or a way to deal with it, in other words. Many times I'm picking at my needle with my fingernail, just getting the dry paint off of it and removing the tip dry. But there's another way. You can use a hollow-stemmed Q-tip. Now that's the kind of Q-tip that, in other words, when you insert this needle right into the cotton tuft, that you'll be able to literally put the needle right down the center of the stem. Now, there's one problem with using a Q-tip. I also learned this from another airbrush artist. These things, the cotton just comes unwound, and it gets to be where it's useless. Like, here's a good example of one I've kind of used up. See, the cotton just loosens up, and it's not easy to use. So what I'd like to do is to show you a way to modify your Q-tips. Can you believe tricking out a Q-tip? But here's what we do. You just take some of the cotton and you pull it up. Go ahead and just frizz it up. And once you get enough of it up, like this, we're going to take a little bit of our spray adhesive. This is called Super 77. This is the adhesive that I use most of the time. It's extremely tacky. You don't take much, okay? But you spray a little of this just kind of at the Q-tip, just enough to prep that cotton. And now we have a much stronger glue than was originally on the Q-tip, if there even was any glue. I don't know that there was. But you just kind of wrap it back together, tamp it down, and it kind of supercharges your Q-tip a little bit there. Now we can take the airbrush now and go ahead and pre-form the little divot that we're going to be using. Okay? And now we've got a tool that we can use over and over and over, and you know, it's not going to fray in like 5 or 6 uses like other Q-tips may. So Now, you'd want to dip this maybe into something that would stay wet. Like I like a little bit of WD-40 on the Q-tip, but water works fine. And that just helps to clean off the end of your needle here, as well as your air cap, and keep all the foreign particles off of there. Okay? Hope that's a tip that'll really save you some time and improve the quality of your painting, because when you're painting with a dirty tip and needle, or a dirty air cap, you're not getting a nice round dot coming out of the airbrush. So the idea is to always maintain a clean needle and tip. Keep an eye on it, especially on the opaque colors like black, white, and some of the newer opaques that some of the companies are coming out with now. Okay. Now, I'd like to move on to some of the silly things you can use for stencils. Would you believe this is duct tape that is bright pink right now, and it still has a plastic wrapper on it, because I forbid anybody who works around me to use this as tape. This is a stencil. It happened to be the right size one day when I was developing a new design, and I panicked. I didn't have a compass. I couldn't make a stencil of the right size circle, and this tape was laying around, and I used it for a sun and a background. Let's say we were doing just a little heart design. Just a freehand little heart. Put a little water scene in here. Well, when I talk about cheap, this is cheap when you're using your shirt board to illustrate on, huh? Soft out the halo. But here's where this little stencil comes in. It'll make a big dramatic sun. Really overstated kind of a sun. Now, you could put the silhouette of a couple kissing in the moonlight and all. Literally, that's all it takes to make a design. And what did you use? A roll of tape. I'm going to move on to the shirt that we just started that Pat helped us with. And I'm going to put a set of eyes on there. But you're going to find that sometimes when you do a pattern like this, it gets in the way. And you got to find a way to work around this color, because I'm going to put eyes on this shirt. Now, but I wanted to talk just a moment about shirt boards before we move farther along. This shirt board is made of masonite, and I'll show you. It's a lot like the one that I just used for an example. Okay, this material is called masonite. And another nice cheap trick is knowing that rather than taking the shirt off a board, let's say we were painting a name style on here. And I've seen in many shops where artists they'll paint the shirt, and then they'll literally take it off the board, hand it to someone who then has to put something in between the two layers of shirt when they heat press it. Well, I find this to be a waste of time, because you can just leave the shirt on the shirt board, and if you have a heat press that's adjustable, and most of them are, you can adjust the gap of how far it squeezes down, and then you can adjust it for the width of this shirt board. You just leave the shirt right on the shirt board when it's masonite, and you can iron the shirt with it still on the board. That eliminates that step and increases your productivity. Another good cheap trick to remember, okay? It's all about time and all about getting as much out of the minute as you can. And so, now, if you have masonite shirt boards already and have never done this, I would not recommend starting with a customer shirt for the first time and pressing it on a board that you've already had, okay? Because if you've got paint on there that hasn't been dried each time, it's probably going to have moisture in it. So if it's got moisture in it, it may release that moisture and stain the shirt. So try it on a rag if you're going to use your own shirt boards that you've had for a while. If not, start fresh with new shirt boards. The other thing about shirt boards is, notice that the width of this shirt board is different than the width of this shirt board. All right? Obviously, it's for different size shirts. But you should notice one other thing. The height is the same. That eliminates the need to be able to adjust the bottom easel here, so that you don't have to slide it up and down for different size shirts. Now, when I first started airbrushing, my little kid shirt boards were about, 12 inches tall, like a little kid shirt is, and only about maybe 6 or 8 inches wide. But then I had to lift my shirt board every time I had a different size shirt. So for some reason, we got a stroke of genius one day and realized we could make all the shirt boards the same height and just change the width. And we didn't have to mess with this anymore. So that's another good tip that's helped me over the years. Now, another thing that I do, which is a little different than some artists, and I'm still not sure whether I recommend this, but this is the way I do it. I make all my shirt boards 24 inches tall. Now, the reason I do that, part of it's out of economy. You take a 4x8 sheet of masonite, split it right up the middle, and you end up with two 2-foot by 8-foot pieces. You follow that? Okay, now you take that and literally chop it into little sections for whatever width you need. Now they're all the same size. And then, so for getting the most use and no scrap out of a 4x8 sheet of masonite, that's the best way to go. But the other thing is, I can take the tail end of the shirt, in most cases, and I can pull it underneath. Now that pulls it tight and removes the wrinkles in the front of the shirt. Then I take the sleeves and tuck them behind, and that removes the wrinkles everywhere else. So basically, you don't have to worry about pinning the sleeves back or taping the sleeves back. It's another thing that saves a little bit of time. The weight of this masonite tends to hold it in place. Okay, so let's move on to a little painting now. I've got a stencil. This particular stencil is made out of a material called polystyrene. It's 20 thousandths thick. Really good stuff. The nice thing about it is that you can literally peel the paint off of it. So let's say I've used this stencil a lot, which I haven't used this one much. But it was caked up. If it were caked up with paint, I could renew it just by peeling the paint off. Now, try that sometime with an acetate stencil. You're going to end up ripping it and destroying all the time it took to cut it. So the nice thing about a plastic like polystyrene, or there's actually a few plastics that you should be aware of. There's a plastic called Lexan, which I'm really loving right now. Learned this from another artist also. This is Lexan. It's also called polyester. It's clear, which makes it nice. If you have a nice detailed drawing that you've done, you can literally lay this on to a piece of glass and lay the glass on top of the drawing you did. And you can take a stencil burner, which is available through the Artistry Catalog and Airbrush Action. And you take the stencil burner, and without ever having to draw on your film, you can just lay it down in place and burn out the areas that you want to use. This stuff stencil burns really well. This is the Air Nouveau stencil burner. It's a nice package. Comes with a real fine tip so that you can make intricate little designs. As a matter of fact, that brings up another point. I did a stencil one time of lips. This lip stencil, and I've talked about this in some of our other videos, but this was originally made on poster board, which is also another good stencil material. But to cut this out of a piece of poster board took forever. I mean, we're talking maybe 3 hours, maybe more. It's been a long time since I've done this, but I know it's at least 3 hours, maybe more. Now, that's tedious work with an X-Acto knife. With a stencil burner and a piece of X-ray film, all right, I can cut this same stencil out in about 15 minutes. So talk about savings of time and cramps in the fingers. It's really helped me to be able to produce these kind of things. Now, the stencil burner is not perfect for everything. If you want a long, straight line, sometimes it's better to use a razor knife or an X-Acto. But, again, you could use like a metal ruler and lay the burner against the metal rule and pull a straight line that way. But in some cases, it'll be faster just to pull out that razor knife. But either way, I think it's an indispensable tool and another cheap trick that I think everyone should have, especially if you're going to make cloud stencils and intricate little things like that. Okay, now, speaking of X-ray film, the reason that X-ray film and Lexan, now the reason I'm trying the Lexan is that it simulates what X-ray film is. It's getting harder and harder for me to find X-ray film. You got to kind of have a friend at the hospital or an ambulance driver or something that can help you out there. Sometimes you can go to reclamation facilities where they reclaim the silver off of X-rays, and they'll have a bunch of scrap material laying around that they're literally throwing away. Sometimes you'll get it for free. But the nice thing about it is it doesn't tear easily. You can really work on it, and it doesn't tear. I challenge you to try that with acetate. Acetate's a wonderful thing now. It's much faster to cut a piece of acetate, but it's also much faster to destroy a stencil that you spend a lot of time on. Oh, by the way, to find that stencil material, any major plastics company, you can usually look in your yellow pages. Some of the companies I've used in the past are Ames Plastic, Royal Plastics, Cadillac Plastics. There's several other. I'm sure I'm leaving people out. But just go to your yellow pages in your local telephone directory. If you live in a very small town and have trouble finding it, you can go to a public library, and they have a system of catalogs called the Thomas Registry, I believe is the name of it. And the Thomas Registry, you can find anything in the Thomas Registry. I mean, if you decide you want to, have something manufactured, they'll have a listing of all these manufacturers that do that kind of a specialty thing. But look it up under plastics. You just have no problem finding that. Okay. Now, Back to the spray adhesive. Use this just to make sure that the paint doesn't blow underneath the edge of the stencil. Now, here's the problem we're going to have. We've got this beautiful splash of color coming across here, and I'm wanting to put a set of eyes there. Now, how in the world am I going to pull a set of eyes out of this? There's not enough white space left. But I'll locate this as best I can, and I see I've got enough white space to get the pupils in, but there's still the white part of the eye I'm going to have to deal with. Start out by going ahead and laying out where the pupils go, and we'll work from there. Okay, that was a transparent color called aqua. This is its opaque counterpart. Now I should be able to opaque out. Now the difference in opaque and transparent is an opaque color will defeat another color. A transparent color is just as it sounds. You'll see other colors coming through it. So transparent colors in many cases are going to look brighter on a white fabric because you can blend them together, and sometimes you can actually accentuate one color with another. But here's the opaque color, really come in handy to hide this little kick right here. A little bit in that corner. Now the one thing about an opaque color is it generally doesn't flow as well as the transparent colors because it's a little bit thicker in nature. So sometimes you got to finesse it just a little bit. I'll go ahead and move to black. Put a little shadow in, a little shadow here, and this is actually the start of an eyebrow on this side. Okay, I'm going to go to a dark blue, and I'm going to spray over that that black that I just put down with blue to kind of hide, the black. You don't want to use much black anytime you're doing eyes. Use as much color as you can. These are little dagger strokes just to simulate the muscles that are in the eyes. This is kind of like a Art Deco style that I do. It's not intended to be realistic at all, just to simulate eyes. Light shade just around the bottoms of it, making sure that the eye's lighter toward where the pupil is, or I guess that would be the pupil, then there's the iris, or is it the iris and then the pupil? I always get that confused. But now I'm going to come back with just a little touch of hot green just to warm that up some. Just overspray it over the whole thing. The last thing I'm going to do is give myself a little indication as to where the corner of this eye starts with a little dot of hot pink there. This particular stencil has the shadow of a nose on it also. I'll lay that in with a little bit of Caribbean blue. And also a light touch of dark blue right at the very edge. So that becomes a graded tone, dark to light. Now we're going to peel this out of the way, and that's all we get off of the stencil. And now you're going to see where my problem comes in. I've got to find a way to fix this little area that's got color across the white. Now, the white is opaque, but it's not strong enough to defeat that much, without using a stencil, so you can kind of saturate it on. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to start with my black. I'm going to outline where this pupil is going to be. I'm going to start here and go around. So basically, I'm drawing in the shape of this eye. Okay, same thing on this one. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put in this eyebrow to complete the eyebrow at least. It's just basically a nice dagger stroke with some other little dagger strokes coming off of it. You can get as wild as you want sometimes with eyebrows. There's a lot of expression you can put in with them. Okay, this is the point where I've got to start considering how I'm going to defeat this white. Now, or this color. I'm going to start actually by putting a touch of blue down, just to kind of, because there's a bright white area here and then there's a colored area here. So I'll put a little bit of blue just to muddy that up a little bit so that when I put the white on, it's going to all look the same. Otherwise, one area would be much wider than the other. Now, this is where we use the wax paper. Now, this is just plain old wax text wax paper. You can use any brand of wax paper. There's nothing magical about that. I just tear a little section off. Back to the adhesive. We also call this stuff duck spit. I don't know if you've ever heard that term, but it's kind of a funny term. It's a guy I've been painting longer than I've been alive, a guy named Tom Davison, who kind of started calling it duck spit, and ever since then I laugh when I think about it. I have to give him a lot of credit. This guy, he was in it in the very beginning, back when nobody was doing it except for maybe Big Daddy Roth. So, okay, now here's the part where it takes a little bit of courage, a little bit of talent. I'm literally going to use an X-Acto knife and cut that area out right on the t-shirt. You got to be careful here, though. Obviously, you could cut through the shirt, and I have done that before back when I was first learning to do this. So again, I'm going to caution you and hope that you will take the time to practice on a rag before you do it on a customer's shirt. I made the mistake of cutting through a biker's vest one time, and boy, talk about nervous. I was nervous. But we were able to fix it. You literally let basically the weight of the blade and the knife, I'm not really pressing down. Let it just do the work for you. Should be able to pull that little section out of the way. This is very similar to what illustrators do when they work on frisket paper. Now, I made a mistake here. I forgot to cut out the colored part of the eye, but it's easy enough to remedy. I just take a moment, put a little bit more adhesive right back on this piece that I just cut out, and lay it right back in place. And that gives me the opportunity to explain to you that if you're doing something really elaborate and custom, you could literally take a piece out, paint it, cover it back up, work another area. So it's just like working frisket on illustration board, so that you can keep protecting the areas that you've completed and mastered. So if you save your pieces, now sometimes it's not practical to save the pieces because they're small, but if it's something like this, it would have been a great thing to be able to cover that back up and then maybe trick out the whole background afterward. So go back in here, do a little cut. Nothing to it. Now, if I remove the correct piece, it'll be right. Okay, now we'll go ahead and cut this last eye out. This time I'll be sure to remember to leave the pupil there. Okay, I'll peel this section out of the way. Now we're ready to work it. Come in with white now. Now, there's such a thing as spraying dry. I've seen people really try to soak on the white and end up with this wet blob that just, the air literally moves the paint around instead of it sticking to the shirt and drying there. So you got to do it in successive layers. So you got to use a lot of air pressure, wide open air pressure. And I'm, by the way, using about 60 to 80 pounds right now. And you're going to put a coat on, and I always, 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 always leave the trigger wide open, always. Okay? And the whole idea is that all that extra air is drying the paint as we're going. So, lay on layers, a little bit at a time. Now, for an area you really want to cover, you just get in a little closer. But remember, don't make a puddle out of it. Just watch it cover. And when you see that it's not covering, then back away and dry it some. Now, it might be apparent, I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but the reason that I use a little bit of blue on the rest of the eye, just so that it's all muddy looking now, instead of this being bright white and this being kind of muddy. Now the whole eye is a similar value of white. Now I'm going to go over it a couple more times to bring it up in intensity. This wax paper technique is really useful for things like let's say you did the portrait of someone's car or their dog or whatever, and you did really a jam-up job on it, but you still got to put a background in there. And you're really concerned that there's going to be overspray getting on the car or whatever you painted. So you just lay the wax paper on there, you cut around the outline of the car, you blow in the background with a carefree attitude and not worry about damaging the car. When you peel that out of the way, it's really going to be sharp and save you some headaches. Okay, now peel this off. Should have a nice bright white set of eyes here. What a way to go, huh? Now, take just a moment. I'll go ahead and put the eyelashes on it. Just a bunch of little dagger strokes. Okay, I'm going to do just a touch of shading and then we'll be done with this one. In the essence of time, we need to kind of move along because we got a lot of information to give to you guys. And I don't want to waste it all on one shirt. So we'll just lightly shade this makeup just to give kind of an indication of the face. And let's see, go for a lighter color blue just to shape this nose a little bit. Sometimes the subtle little things will make a big difference. We'll come back and highlight that with a little bit of white, and that should really pop that out. And a touch of pink in the bottom, just to show the lower lid. And hot green, just to match some of this nice green that's in there for the edges. Soften it out. Now we're not going to do a complete face, we're just kind of doing one of those essence of a girl's face. Shading for the makeup. And now the last thing would be a little bit of white. Right in the eye here. A little along the bottom of the eyes because the eyes are usually wet at the very bottom. And that highlight up the nose, it's going to help to bring this nose out. There's a little bit of underlighting that happens here. And that's it. That shows you how to use a wax paper technique and how effective it can be at putting the eyes in place there and defeating this color that comes across. Our last demo that we just did involved twisting the shirt and a certain amount of folding in this and that. But one of the things that I haven't talked about that, now, this is mainly for the guys. We don't know how to fold shirts, guys. Let's admit it. All right? I've never told my mom I can fold shirts either. If I'm ever around her house, I want her to fold them for me. I'm still lazy about that. But here you go. I did learn how to do it, and I want to show you guys the fastest, easy way to fold without having to lay things on the table. The whole idea is you take the shirt and just fold it right straight in half. Okay? Easy enough for anybody to do, right? Now we're going to take that, and we're going to fold that section in 1/3, and then take that third and wrap it over the other third. Okay? Then all you're left with a long rectangular shape with a sleeve hanging out. Slop that sleeve over, fold that down, and every time that you fold it this way, your airbrushing will come out on top. So it's going to look nice when you put it in the bag to hand to the customer. And so when they take it out to show it to whoever they bought the gift for, or if it's for themselves, it's just going to be a better presentation if you fold it that way and put it in the bag. And you don't need counter space to do it. That's the other good thing about it. All right, speaking of folding and scrunching here, for you illustrators who may be viewing this tape, if you've wondered how they're doing that real wrinkled paper-looking background on some of the illustrations now, it looks like they spent tedious hours frisketing or stenciling the wrinkles in the paper. But literally, it's just as simple as scrunching a piece of paper up, pulling it partially out. You take your airbrush, spray at a low angle across it. What that's going to do is catch all the folds in one direction. Now I'm going to hand this to someone to go iron it for me, and in the meantime we're going to do a t-shirt in a similar way. We'll compare the effect. Now this one I'm going to show you, I also learned at one of the seminars that we conducted from another instructor, and I've been doing something similar to it but never quite the same. It's where you kind of scrunch the shirt all up. You literally just lay it down on your table, just pick any section and start working it and scrunching it together. Just form just erratic wrinkled patterns into it. Now, there's a lot of different names for this. This one particular person, and I'm very sorry I can't remember his name right now, but he was a great guy. But he called it air dye. And I thought it was kind of neat. I thought it would be a good trick to pass along. Now, see, I've just formed just an erratic wrinkled shirt. Now, we're going to use, I'll use blue again, just so we can kind of compare it with that paper that I just used. Same thing, I'm at a real low angle. I'm just going to spray kind of across the shirt at those wrinkles and work my way up the shirt. Now, if you wanted to be really tricked with this, I guess you could go various different colors, like blue to hot green to hot yellow, something along that lines. But for this demo, I'm just going to spray with the one color blue in this direction. Now, I am going to show you kind of another twist on this by, we're taking blue in this direction. I'm literally going to spin the whole shirt board around, and I'm going to change colors and spray with another color. That'll give me two different colors on the shirt. So it'll be like shadow on one side, highlight on the other. So you can kind of see the effect of what I was looking at now from the camera looking at this angle. Come back with, let's see, hot green, I believe is what I want to use from the other angle. I'm just going to lightly spray this. I don't want to do too much to overwork it. That's literally all there is to it. That, again, would probably raise the cost of this garment, which was a blank, from where I could sell the blank for around $6 or $7, depending on your marketplace. Sometimes you can get higher than that, but I can now probably get $15 to $20 for this shirt, and it took no intelligence to do. That's the best thing about cheap tricks. They don't take a whole lot of intelligence. So again, you can train monkeys to do this practically, and you could have a whole bunch of these hanging on your racks and sell them as outfits. Now, we're going to contrast this with this piece of paper. Now, look how effective this is. This is ironed now. It's nice and flat. So this literally looks like we spent a long time to do this, but it really achieves that wrinkled look. You might use this as a background or something behind a model. Let's say you're going to do an image of a girl. You just glue this paper down and airbrush the girl in place. And so it really looks like you spent time in the background. We'll talk a little bit about stencils. When you make a stencil, there's positive space and negative space. A stencil negative, to me, this is the way I define it. It's an open space that you're spraying into. A positive, I'll show you the positive to this stencil. Positive will be something that is what I would say positively in your way, okay? You have to spray around it. That's a good way to think about it. So when you make your stencils, you want to save the pieces that you cut out because you'll use them later on in different parts of the process. Now, we're going to start by placing the stencil positive right on the shirt. Now, a little bit of adhesive helps to hold it down. smooth it out with your hands. Or another good thing to do is to have a brayer or a roller. And you can roll the edges down. That's a really good technique to make sure your stencils stick tight. So, now, I'm going to start with black. I'll pick up a clothespin or any other thing that you have around that you can bounce the stream of the paint off of. I'm going to lay the air cap right on the clothespin. And I'm literally going to spray paint right at the clothespin. The paint's going to roll down the clothespin and be dispersed into small droplets. So that's how we make the granite effect. Now, the motion that I'm using, rather than holding straight at the shirt, is little bitty circles like this. I'm moving my hands in a pattern. That helps to keep the dots uniform. Now, they're random, but you got to still control them to a certain extent. So this seems to help. Now, the farther away you get from the shirt, the bigger the dots are going to be, because it's going to, take longer time for it to get there, and it's going to spread out, I guess. But basically, I'd like to keep them just one consistent size and try to keep everything even. Now, one other secret I've learned is to always vignette the edges, to back away and just with the airbrush itself smoothly shade the edges, just to kind of add some weight to the overall look of these dots, as well as to blend it out to the edge of the shirt so it doesn't look like it just stops. Slowly work that in. The other thing is I'm going to shadow this heart with a pretty heavy shading of black while I'm at it. And before I get too far along, since the paint doesn't always dry as fast as you'd like it to, I don't want to get a few different colors on and then try to put these cracks in. I'm going to go ahead and put these little lines in, which are going to represent cracks in the granite. You can be just as erratic as you'd like with this. One thing I would caution you to avoid is avoid overdoing it. Don't put too many cracks. I've seen people just spend forever putting little dinky lines on the shirt, and it really clutters it up rather than really making it look like granite. It just seems to, I don't know, it looks like you tried too hard, I guess. Just some in a couple of directions. Okay, now we're going to move on to deep purple or violet. The same stippling texture. Now this same technique can be used on a lot of things. Let's say, I'm doing just this granite background, but you could use this like all in pink, for example, as a name style, or a purple or blue, or you can use 3 different colors, just blot, 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 so it looked like a real runny paint gun sprayed on the shirt, just for a background. Then you put a beautiful script name in place of it, and you got a new design. It's another trick that can be used in different ways. All right, the last thing we're going to use is a little bit of blue. Notice that between each color, I did that slight vignette, kind of bring the whole thing together. Now we come back, pick up our white, accent these cracks so they look more like cracks. Just get in real close, real tight line. Remember, a lot of air and a little paint and a couple layers works better than trying to flood it on all at one time. Now basically on these cracks, I pick what side I'm going to highlight and I stick that way the whole way along. So I'm going underneath each line and I try to stay that way. There's one exception, however, where there's like a little chunk missing. You're going to have to highlight the top a little bit just to show that this is recessed. Now, we're done with that much. We're going to pull our positive out of the way, and we have negative space left. When planning your stencils, you got to take into account that you got to have room on your stencil so that the overspray won't get on the shirt. So make sure you think about that when planning your stencils. That's why the first part of this design is done this way, and then I literally flip it to finish it. That way I have more room on the stencil and less overspray problems. So go ahead and lube this up with a little bit of adhesive. And place it. This is going to be like drippy paint running over a marble type of a heart. This design's done fairly well for me. And I think it might be another opportunity for me to show you a cheap trick with the marble type background that we're going to do on the bottom. Now I'm going to start out just by shading with some hot purple the very edges of this drip pattern. Now back away, I'm just going to soften it, letting the distance work for me. Working that tip dry. Might mention that the brush that I'm using is made by a company called Fair & Chandler. It's the Vega 2000. Pretty proud of this brush. I'm real happy with the way it works. And I had a hand in designing it, so kind of makes me feel good to use a product that worked out right, you know. Sometimes you help people design something and it just doesn't work and you're ashamed, but this one I'm pretty happy about. Puts out a lot of paint, but yet still gives me a good fine line. I've used other brushes in the past, and I still use some other different types of brushes. This is the predominant brush that I use these days. I have about 20 of these. Just fill in that hot pink. Now we can just pull that right out of the way. And you don't worry too much about areas that don't cover because it gets an outline anyway. That's another thing about using stencils. Another cheap trick is to, if you can, to outline things to try to hide the fact that it was a stencil. It makes it look a little bit nicer. Now, we'll line this up the best you can. Now, I'm going to start on this one using hot green. Just going to flood the whole thing with hot green. Now, the reason I use green is that pink and green are complementary colors, which means they're across from one another on the color wheel. The thing about pink and green is you never want to try to blend the two together because you get mud. You get an earth tone. It's kind of brown. But when sitting side by side with one another, they actually make one another appear brighter than they really are because they sort of vibrate. And something, if you don't know your color wheel, I'd suggest pick one up at your art store. Read the little information on it. It's all you really need for color to teach you how to use things and what doesn't go well together. But that and a little practical experience will really do it for you. Now, here's the next cheap trick. If you're in business for yourself, you've probably got some plastic bags like this laying around. And these things come in handy sometime to do this next texture. I just stick my hand right in the bag, just kind of scrunch and wad the bag up real good. Okay? And I'm going to pick up my deep blue and soak this down real good. Okay? Now I'm going to move to the shirt and just dab it. And I'll keep renewing the paint on the bag so that I get the right color on there. It's an interesting texture. Now if you do this right, you can make it look like marble. I'm just achieving just kind of a funky effect right now. But to make it marble, you probably put some like veins of color through there rather than just the little scrunchy colors. You like lay in like some lines like this. Maybe I will go ahead and do a marble type feeling to it here. Just throw these little veins through there. And then of course you always want to shade the edges so that everything blends nicely together. And we'll take, actually I need the opposite side to that, but I can freehand this part right here. Just throw a little shadow underneath these things to make them look lifted. Now when we peel that off, the last step in the process is going to be just to outline things. I'm going to use violet to outline it because it's going to be a complementary color for all of this. Okay, and a little bit of shading on each of the little drips to give them some thickness. You know, the airbrush can produce a lot of different effects. Soft lines and hard lines are the two major elements. These are like real soft lines, just shading. Okay. Now, we'd write a couple names on there. Now, of all the name styles that I've ever done, the word Peggy gives me the biggest challenge to make look good. And one of the reasons is you got a tall letter, a short letter, and 3 hang-em-down letters, right? And when you get 3 of them with loops that hang down like this, it really gets monotonous and hard. So I wish I had some magical answers for you, but this one still challenges me. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to highlight this, a little bit of white, just to help bring it out some from the background. Get in nice and close. A little dot, and I kind of pull the dot down to a little dagger stroke. Now this highlighting that I'm doing right now is what makes it where you can read this E, because the confusion of this curve and the dark background was making it where I couldn't even read the E. So now I can come back with the highlights and save it. Okay, and that's the completion of that, showing you granite and a little bit about marble. Now the one other thing about marble would be you might put some white streaks in it also. You might actually put some cracks in there similar to this. But I don't see any need to do all that right now. I think you kind of understand the concept. Creating special effects and cheap little tricks involves kind of a vivid imagination. You've got to be able to look at something that you wouldn't normally use. Like, as a guy, I'm sure I would never go into the fabric department and buy some lace. They looked at me real strange when I went and got this stuff, but it's made me some money. So in your daily life, when you're looking at things and looking at different textures, I really suggest that you consider other ways that you can use these textures in your artwork. For example, if you go to the junkyard, you may go to like an industrial area that has metal stencils where they've stamped out a whole bunch of the same part, and it has these erratic shapes. And you might just pick up this junk that people have thrown away and be able to use it for an odd kind of a texture in a background. And for example, I wanted just something funky and weird for a background texture, so I just spent some time with the stencil burner and a piece of X-ray film and just cut out real odd shapes. And now I can use any or all of this stencil to make different background things. I can just lay this up there, maybe tape off an area and spray through it, and then I'll have just like a border with just funky, I guess you would say this is tribal-looking patterns or whatever, or I don't know, animal-like skin. I don't know what you'd even call this, but the whole idea is that it's something out of the ordinary that'll catch people's eye and make them, notice your artwork more. So here's one way of doing it. You can use lace, as I've said earlier. I just took a piece of this lace, cut it out, took one of my stencils that I normally use, which is just the shape of a heart, and I took some spray adhesive, and I literally sprayed onto the piece of lace a whole layer of adhesive, and I sprayed onto the poster board some adhesive, and then when I put them together, it's like contact cement. Once they touch each other, they don't move. So it's real easy to make yourself a little impromptu stencil. So we're going to use this now on the shirt, and I'll show you sort of the secret to making this work. This has been done for years. They've been doing this, since the 60s, and maybe even earlier than that when they do custom painting on cars and motorcycles. But, some people are adapting it and using it for T-shirt use. You just center your stencil, rub it on down with your hand, And the funny thing about this is when you do a design with lace on it, you know, you have it on your sample on your wall, customers come up there and they get real close and they want to touch it because they think it really is lace. And they're really amazed. Then they go to the other stage of disbelief of saying, there's no way he could paint those lines. No way. And it's kind of funny when you see him puzzled and trying to figure it out. So eventually I just walk up to him and explain to him how I did it and get him off the hook. Start with a little purple as an underpainting. The reason I'm using purple is just make the red a little deeper on the edges. Just a little bit of shading in the center of the heart. Now, I go to red, right over the purple that I've already put down. Staying way back and letting the distance do the work for me. Blend this in. The last step is going to be using some hot pink to warm the whole center area up. Now we'll just peel this away. What an effect, huh? Now, just to complete this so it doesn't look like just a raw edge, I like to take another color, and in this case, let's use hot raspberry then. And just do a border around it. Nicely saturated with color. Fairly simple. You could just write a couple of names on it now, and that's a seller. You could take it a step further and throw like a rainbow across it, coming out of the back edges of it. Do whatever you want with it, but the whole idea is that you've got an interesting center section for people to turn to. A little bit about some items that I think everybody should be familiar with. These are called freehand shields. Now, there's a book that I learned about this from. The author is Radu Vero. I believe I'm pronouncing his name correctly. And the name of the book is Airbrush, the Studio Handbook. I highly, highly, highly recommend that book because this guy is really good at explaining how to use this shield, which I'm not positive, but I believe he actually designed this shape. It's amazing. I find so many uses for this particular shape in doing portraits, in doing cars, in doing animals. You know, and it's great. It's just a time saver. You can just hold this up, spray around this edge, and then maybe you flip this over and spray around this edge, and then you've eliminated making a stencil or a frisk. It's great in illustration as well as t-shirt airbrushing. Now then you can move on to making your own freehand shields. This is one that I made, and just to show you that it took some thought to make this. I actually made a major mistake in this, though, just to show you what to think about. When he designed this shield, this curve and this curve match one another. So you have a negative and a positive. In other words, if I laid this down and sprayed around this edge, I could move this over and it'll butt up to it perfectly. And I could spray the other direction and have a perfect seam with no overlap. So when I made mine, I made the mistake of making the two outside edges the same. This should have been actually the inverse. It should have curved the opposite direction so that it would have matched this. Okay? So think about that when you're designing your own shields. And remember that it's kind of like yin and yang. Where this hook right here comes down, the opposite is right here. So you have the positive and the negative at your disposal. For accenting your artwork, what do you do just to be different? Well, for a clear coat, I like sometimes to take a little bit of airbrush extender or airbrush medium. If you're using some of the other different companies' products, this is Createx, but other different companies call it different things. Aquaflow calls theirs top binder. There's different things you can add this into. Just all you need is a carrier to carry this. And this is made by a company called Ditzler. It's micro sequins. And it's super, 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 super fine dust. Really neat stuff, and it gets all over you. But this can, or plastic bottle as it is, was 4 ounces when I bought it about 8 years ago. And I've still got product left. It doesn't take much. So you literally just take a little bit of this stuff. I just rake it out into the jar here. It doesn't take much. And remember, it's going to go all over everything and everything in your shop, so you might want to keep a shop vac around to clean up after yourself. But pour a little bit of extender in there with it, just enough to suspend the particles. Swish it around good, get them all floating and wet. You can actually just add it to some of your regular t-shirt designs, but we'll just take this license plate. Want to make sure that you get all the paint out of the brush you were just using by running some water through your airbrush. Just back away, dust this thing. You can probably see even on the background, if I spray some on the background, how it sparkles and glitters. And the nice thing about this is when people see you do this to a shirt, especially little girls, they got to have it. And so if you don't have it displayed on your wall as one of the normal things you do, that's extra. And you just calmly hold out your hand and say, well, that's just $2 to do that. Okay, well, moving further into the cheap tricks, it's important to know that when you do a license plate, you should scuff it. Even though, for example, this license plate is a flat white, it's not a glossy white, I still like to scuff it first. This gives the surface of the license plate a little bit of a tooth and makes it where the paint doesn't seem to caterpillar as much on it, doesn't try to run around on you as much. So what I'm using to scuff it with is it's called a Scotch-Brite pad. You can find these in your local grocery store used to clean pots and pans. So I just lightly scuff it, then wipe the dust off of it, hang it on a couple of these screws up here, and I'm going to quickly stipple this and show you a neon effect on it. Start this time with a little gray. Now on a license plate, you don't really want to pour the paint on. You want to use tiny little dots. So I'm not using as much paint. I'm not pulling the trigger back as far. I'm using a lot of air so it kind of dries as I go. I get a little coat of this, and then again that all-important shading. Let's see, I'll go to some black. A little bit with the black. Same as the granite we did earlier. The only exception is I'm using a little bit of gray in this. Now sometimes you get little shadows from the hooks that you got the plate hanging on, so you got to lift the plate up and blend those shadows in. Okay, I'm going to go to some purple. Now this can also be altered depending on what color car you want to do. If I had a blue truck I was trying to match this to, for example, I'd put a lot of blue in there instead of a lot of black in there. But I'm doing something very generic right now just so it'll match just about anything. I'm going to do a little touch of blue. Now to even this out a little bit, I'm actually going to use a little bit of white also. Now, you know, you can go kind of crazy with how many colors you put into one of these things. Usually 3 colors will do it. But this is an example of how to get away with about 5 colors. Be careful, though, not to overdo it. I've seen some people put like 10 colors on there and it becomes mud. Okay. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put a few cracks on it just to help complete it. But first I'm drying it. Notice I'm not adding any paint. I've just got the air turned on, playing the air around the license plate. Now another cheap trick at this point would be if you had a hair dryer, just a handheld hair dryer, you could blow dry this license plate in a matter of seconds. Just getting in real close, nice fine line. Now, if you're having trouble with your line spidering or looking like a little caterpillar feet, then chances are you're putting too much paint on, and it's not drying real fast. If you put too much paint on, it's wet and it smears in all directions. So either increase your speed that you're moving, or reduce the amount of paint that you're putting. So, and remember, it's key that you get up close. Now, I'm going to go ahead and highlight this with a touch of white. Start with white again. We're just going to do a little heartbeat across this. If I would have used aqua, we could have been done in just this one pass right here. But I want to show you how to build up a neon, like for a hot pink neon or red. So start with white and try to defeat the background with the white. Notice how I took a couple of passes to do that rather than trying to do it all at one time. Now, I'm going to take my black right now and shadow this. Not worrying that I'm going across the white again. Because then I'm going to come back one more time with the white. And I'm going to fix these areas that I crossed with black. Now we'll come back with the hot pink. Actually, let's go red and then put hot pink on top of it. We'll warm it up real good. Now I'm not going to be real careful about staying only on the white because neon usually casts a little glow around it. So it's actually kind of good if it oversprays a little bit. Staying way back when I'm doing this. Okay. I'm going to come back now and highlight, put a couple of hot spots on it, just with white. Again, let me look at it and make sure the paint's kind of dry. I might want to play my air around on it some. Check for tip dry. Okay, now I'm going to come back with hot pink on top of everything, and that'll make those hot spots not so outstanding, but still they'll be a lot warmer than the area around it. Okay, that's the effect of neon over granite. Now, this is great with Chevy fans because the heartbeat of America, you'll sell a lot of those to those type people. You could throw people's names on there, maybe a guy and girl's name. Couples plates are always nice to sell. A new paint, actually there's a lot of companies that make this, but Createx has just debuted this stuff called iridescence that they've really worked on. They've had it out for a while, but they haven't really concentrated on marketing it. And so therefore, a lot of painters don't know about it. But they have these iridescent acrylics, and the stuff I'm going to use for this is actually a flip-flop, which means, and I'll show you on the license plate, it changes colors with different angles of light. Kind of neat. The paint companies are all getting really competitive right now, and that's to our advantage. There's several companies that are really pushing the market right now. Createx and Aquaflow have been the top players for a while now, but there's Dr. P.H. Martin's that's coming in. Golden, I think, is interested in making some colors. Another person, that I've seen recently is Deca. They're really trying to get back in the t-shirt market. They've been in the business for a long time. A lot of people use Deca for years and kind of shied away, but it's worth a second look now. They're really having some nice products now. But Aquaflow, for example, while I'm talking about these things, they have this new technology they're playing with. Everyone has seen the hypercolor shirts that when you touch the shirt, it changes colors from heat. The sensitivity of you touching it and the heat changes. But Aquaflow actually has a paint that's photoreactive. So let's say we're indoors like we are now, you can't really see that this is yellow. But if we were to airbrush on a shirt with this and go outside and the ultraviolet rays, once they hit this brilliant yellow comes up. So it opens up a lot of possibilities. I don't even know what we can do with this stuff. It's so new. But it's kind of hard to use in that it's sort of invisible when you're using it. But can you imagine that you paint a portrait of like a woman's face, and when you're indoors, she just is eyes. But when you walk outside, she has sunglasses on. Can you imagine the possibilities if this stuff can be made to work that well? This is what it looks like in the bottle. This I'm using right now is called interference green. And so when you lean the bottle different ways, and I doubt that the camera can pick this up, but the license plate you'll be able to see, it's going to flip-flop, and you'll see the green come up. We're going to start with a black license plate, and I scuffed it already. And I've got a little bit of this iridescent color in this bottle, and I'm going to swap it out with a color that would be complementary, this yellow. Okay, spray a little bit to make sure it's clear. And before I get started, I'm going to because you got to be ready for this one, I'm going to pick up some clear plastic wrap. The same kind of stuff you use to wrap your food to put in the refrigerator. I'm just going to pull this out and tear off a piece. This is another little trick that through going to these airbrush seminars, you know, I happen to teach the seminars along with some other instructors, but I learn a lot out of them myself from students. And this is a little tip I picked up for someone. And you just pull a piece of this off, and you just have it ready. And you go ahead, take your airbrush, and you soak down this license plate. Just literally cover it. It has a real light green tint to it, but it's mostly milky white looking. And it really looks like I'm making a big mistake by doing this. But the effect when I'm done is really dramatic. And you can do this with other colors, but it just seems to be particularly effective over black. Now, while that's still wet, I'm going to take this saran wrap type stuff, and I'm going to lay it on there, just kind of scrunch it down and move it around. And then I'm just going to dab it and flop it. Just move it around. And this is going to achieve the effect of Reynolds wrap or wrinkled aluminum foil is the look that it's going to give. Now, this is not just useful in painting t-shirts or license plates. This is great to add to someone's car, like a whole panel down the side of their car. And this, you know, opens up another avenue of money for the guy who can use an airbrush artist, or the person, I should say, being in the politically correct times that we are. But I'm going to hold this toward the camera, and I'm going to lean it around a little bit and see if maybe you can see that color change happening in here. See how it kind of looks like aluminum foil in that texture. Kind of interesting. Okay, there's another cheap trick. Now, what you do with this and how you embellish it's up to you. But, you know, it looks great with a real nice name style right across it. Real classy looking letters with this kind of background really stands out. Now, keep in mind, you could do this with just stock paint like blues, and maybe you have a blue background, you spray red on top of it, and you crinkle it around. But you got to work it while the paint's still wet, so you got to be fast with it. And then you'll have blue and red, which is two colors that should not blend together without making purple, but sometimes you can get away with that. The last thing I want to show you is a similar effect to that, but we're going to make the look of wood. And again, we're going to start out by scuffing the license plate. I'm going to start out by soaking this license plate with yellow. Now, I'm using fluorescent yellow, but it's only because that's all I have hooked up right now. Probably would be more correct to use just a regular straight yellow. Just wide open on the paint, just really keeping it wet so I'll have a little more time to work with it. Okay, now I'm going to pick up some dark brown. And I'll flood the corners. At this point, you can see the little bubbles poking out of it. It's just really wet. Really, again, if a customer sees you doing this, he thinks, wow, this guy's really making a mistake. And I'm going to pick up, I have a lighter color brown I'm going to blend in also. Okay, now you could actually take the clothespin and do just a light stipple on there. Helps to add to that wood effect. And I'll tear off another piece of this saran wrap. Again, we're just going to lay it on there, but this time we're going to stretch it long ways. Peel it directly straight off. Now that gives us a texture to start with that simulates wood. Come back now, my browns one more time. Shade the edges. Actually, probably wouldn't be a bad idea to hit some dark brown on there and maybe stretch one more piece across it because I might have removed just a little too much. Let's see how I can do that. I might be able to work it from here anyway. Shade those edges. Now remembering that it's a little bit wet still, I'll look at the wettest areas, come in here and draw some real light lines. And in some cases you might want to actually let this dry, and I think we'll probably do the same thing right now. We're going to go ahead and take this and take a break and let this dry. Okay, we've taken the time out to dry this license plate so that now that I can work on it and draw lines on it without worrying about smearing the image. So I'll come in here now and add a couple of lines just to add a little bit more interest to it. But what I'm doing is I'm taking my cues from what's already there. See these little angles that come at this direction right here? I'm just going to accent them just a little bit. This makes it really erratic and it helps to give that appearance of wood. But I'm going to take right here and put me a big old knot. Circle in and darken that area. And that's really that telltale sign that makes it wood. That's when people start identifying it better. But that and a little shading around the edges. And we got wood. Okay. Okay, that's the last of the cheap tricks for this tape. We may have more in the future as we see fit to come out with more videos on cheap tricks. If you'd enjoy it, please let the people of the magazine know. We appreciate your watching us and learning from us. We hope that we've been informative and clear about the techniques that we've demonstrated. And we invite you to come see one of our seminars sometime. And also, I'd like to invite you to read the magazine, Airbrush Action. Give us a call if you need a subscription, 1-800-876-2472. Thank you very much.